Alrighty, welcome back, everybody. Let's talk about some rigged and scripted Australian sports in this video. We will cover in a little greater detail Geelong's scripted AFL Premiership, and then we'll get to the Penrith Panthers. And may I say, as I'm doing this video outside in the early hours of October 3rd, it is cold as shit out here. I mean, it is way too early for it to be this cold. Where the fuck is global warming when you need it? I mean, everybody in this town should be out in the streets with aerosol cans right now. But anyway, before we get into the AFL and the NRL, did you guys see the story that came out of Indonesia October 1st about 125 people being killed during a soccer riot? That's hysterical because Indonesia is a country that's like 95% Muslim. And notice the full name of ISIS, Islamic State of Iraq and Levant, is 125 people killed on 10/1, the 5-year anniversary of the Vegas shooting in a predominantly Islamic nation. And what's hilarious about that is the Vegas shooting the perpetrator was Stephen Paddock, and ISIS told the mainstream media that Stephen Paddock had converted to Islam 6 months prior to the shooting. I mean, come on, man. How do people not see it? But, and again, that was the all-time greatest decode in sports history. I'm taking credit for that one because we had Vegas in the Stanley Cup final as an expansion team paying 150-1 before the season began. It brings back such fond memories every time we get to this time of year because the Vegas shooting happened on 10/1 right before the start of the 101st season of the NHL. And I said, watch, Vegas will be the first expansion team in 51 years to reach the Stanley Cup final. They won exactly 51 games during the regular season. The word conspiracy sums to 51. So does tinfoil hat. Think about Area 51. That's also in Nevada, just like Las Vegas. And here's the crazy thing. I didn't even realize this. They came out and said that Stephen Paddock was a far-right radical. I was missing this all these years. If you've never seen my video on Vegas and Washington, I'll link it in the description. It's a must-watch. It's one of the best videos I ever made. But check this out. In terms of politics, the word far-right is also 51. I'm like, look at that, man. How perfect is it? And again, I can tell you anything you want to know about the Vegas Golden Knights that year, man. That Stanley Cup final, that was ice cream. Again, gold, when spelled correctly, Golden Knights, 64. Stephen Paddock was 64 years old. The last time the Golden Knights and Capitals played was 64 days before Stephen Paddock's April 9th 4-9 birthday. And the word kill is also 64. And in light of him being born on 4-9, April 9th, Washington sums to 49. The Capitals won 49 games that season. Alex Ovechkin scored 49 goals. I'll never forget, on Zach's old blog, Free to Find Truth, there were only like a handful of us, like 4 or 5, that used to decode the NHL on his old blog. And one of the guys who lived in Utah made the 4-hour ride to Vegas and put a parlay on Vegas, who was paying like 150-1 to win the Western Conference, and he parlayed it with Washington to win the Eastern Conference, and that guy won over $350,000 on that. I'll never forget that. And all those comments on all of Zach's old channels and his videos covering covering the shootings, all those comments we left about the NHL and how it was synced up with the Golden Knights and the Stanley Cup have all been lost to history unless somebody happened to take a screenshot of it. So you gotta hate Google censorship, man. But that far right piece, that was crazy when I discovered that. I'm like, look at that, man. And don't worry, we will have a video out in the Stanley Cup this year before the season begins. By the way, if you want to look at the Prague sums to 32 in the most pure cipher, and the season begins in Prague between the Nashville Predators and the San Jose Sharks. Do a little research and find out which team can get their 32nd points in their season opening games. But I will have a video. I got a thought on what the Stanley Cup will be. I know I'm like 99.9% sure we got the champion next year. This year, a little bit more tricky, but I will have something out on Patreon. If you're interested in that, the link will be in the description. But next year, that's going to be our year. First ever decode I did, Penguins, Predators, 2016-2017. I said 2024, that's going to be the year. But anyway, let's get into Geelong's scripted AFL Premiership. Just like last year, don't forget last year we had the death of a former Aussie rules footballer who played for Melbourne and the Western Bulldogs, and he just happened to drop dead the day Melbourne and Western were playing in the grand final. This year, we got the story of Aussie rules surfer, Aussie surfer Chris Davidson, who had dropped dead at age 45, as CNN tells us. It says, former Australian surfer Chris Davidson has died at age 45 after being punched outside a pub in Australia. Police said they were called to the pub on Saturday evening in Southwest Rocks, New South Wales, after reports of a man had been allegedly punched in the face outside of the premises. According to the police, the man had fallen onto the ground and hit his head on the pavement. Now, key word in there, key number, 45. Geelong Cats sums to 45. We're talking about the language of gematria here, the ancient practice of coding letters into numbers. Geelong Cats sums to 45. They win the grand final. He's dead on the date they win the grand final. Now, it goes on to say, when officers arrived, they found a 45-year-old man unconscious. He was treated at the scene by paramedics before being taken to the hospital, where he died a short time later. So did the paramedics treat him, or did they kill him? It says specialist officers were sent to the crime scene shortly afterwards. A 42-year-old man was arrested in connection with the death. He was charged with assault causing death and refused to bail to appear before the Port Macquarie Ball Court on Sunday. I might have butchered that. Notice they say he was killed by a 42-year-old. Notice Sydney Swans sums to 42. Geelong Cats 45, Sydney Swans 42. A 45-year-old killed by a 42-year-old. The date Geelong wins the grand final. Coincidence, right? This game was in the Melbourne Cricket Ground. Notice Sydney, they fell to 4-2 against Geelong in the finals all time. Melbourne sums to 42. And that means that Geelong improved to 2-4 versus Sydney, and the game was on the 24th of the month. So, 24/9, September 24th, Geelong wins 133-52, and when I saw that final score, I just laughed. I laughed because they couldn't have scripted it any better, and we're going to get to it. So, Chris Davidson, he died. He was born New Year's Day, 1978, died September 24th, meaning he was dead exactly 38 weeks after his birthday. No surprise there. Words like murder, death, killing, the acronym RIP, they all sum to 38. Geelong sums to 38. No doubt he was sacrificed for Geelong. So this was the 126th season of the AFL, and notice that Geelong won the grand final to conclude the 126th season by coincidentally getting their 126th win against Sydney all time. It's hysterical, too. It was the 229th matchup all time between the two teams because 229 is the 50th prime number and grand final sums to 50. And in the 3 years I've been decoding Aussie rules, 50 has always been the number. And Geelong improved to 10-10 in grand finals. And, of course, football and Sydney both summed to 29, the 10th prime number. We're talking about Aussie rules football. So Melbourne and Geelong, check this game out, man. This is the game here that really foretold Geelong being in the finals. And again, it was against Melbourne, who hosted the grand final. But notice Melbourne won 91-63. This game was all perfectly synced up with the election that Anthony Albanese won over Scott Morrison. Because notice in this game, Geelong got their 133rd win over Melbourne all time. Scott Morrison was born on the 133rd day of the year. And notice how Scott Morrison sums to 63, and Melbourne went down in that game with 63 points. What made it tricky was that had Melbourne won the grand final, they would have got their 57th finals win all time. And that's why I said you better have a future both ways. Because Anthony Albanese, his name sums to 249, like the date 24/9. We knew the election was going to be tied into this, and boy, was it ever. Now, here was my biggest fuck up. Sydney and Geelong played one time during the regular season, and that was on March 25th. The game summed to 184 points, 184 days before the grand final, and the word grand final sums to 184. I don't talk about this number with the grand final that often, but man, it is relevant, and it mattered here. And I wish I had seen that, man. That's where you want to kick your own ass when you miss something like that. It's like, come on, dumbass. 100 games sums to 184 points. 184 days before the grand final, a 184. And again, Geelong, they go down with 77 points in this game, right? We just talked about how the Melbourne Geelong game was synced up with the grand final, and that game was on 7-7, right? July 7th, no matter where you are in the world, July 7th is 7-7. So that game, the election, that was 126 days before the grand final. And I was like, Should have seen that one from the beginning of the year, man. We should have been on Geelong and Sydney before the year began. But, hey, can't win them all. Well, we did win this one. It's pathetic not to be able to call it right when it's down to two teams. But I should have told people, bank on it, man. Geelong over Sydney, because look at that. Government, 133-52. In the United States, words like White House, president, they're also 133. So, again, even when we're – because my initial thought – was Melbourne's going to win it. I told people to make sure you got that hedge bet on Geelong, but not thinking that, Melbourne does host the grand final, and that might be why they were chosen in this game. And sure enough, they were. I hate that when my initial hunch is right, and then you fuck up and you miss something like I did right here. There's just no excuse for this. No excuse for this. But again, had Melbourne won, they would have got that 57th finals win all time. So can't totally blame myself there. It's all about finding the narrative, guys. You got to find the right narrative. But we did. Once the grand final was set, we said, boom, how's Geelong not getting their 126th all-time win against Sydney to win the grand final to conclude the 126th season? So again, even, we're not far off. We weren't far off. And again, when the grand final was set, most people made all their money back and then some. So, and nobody should have lost money anyway, because we said have that hedge bet in, man. Always be smart. Always be smart. Like next year, I'll tell you this, next year, the narrative will be the Port Arthur massacre, because what's his face? Martin Bryant, his name's 56 in the most pure cipher, like Society of Jesus. He turns 56 years old, and he's born on the 127th day of the year. Okay? So next year, 127th season of the AFL, guarantee you it's synced up with the Port Arthur massacre. We just got to figure out what two teams are connected. And again, we'll do that on Patreon as always. You know what? I know Port Adelaide, they're the only team that's 56 in the most pure cipher. We'll see what they do next year, but it'll be connected to that. I know the Port Arthur massacre happened in 1996, which was a leap year, but understand, Martin Bryant, he was not born in a leap year. He was born on the 127th day of the year. So I'm telling you, next year, that's the year. That's the year it's about the Port Arthur massacre. So let's go to the Penrith Panthers here. This was rugby league all year. I told people, I said, I wouldn't place a bet on this till the grand final. I would just wait and see what happens. We did say June 12th why Penrith would be in the grand final, but we weren't sure until the grand final was set whether or not they were going to win. But when it was set, when the final was set, we said, oh yeah, they're going to win, and I'm going to show you why. So Penrith wins the grand final. They blew out Parramatta. It's pretty funny how in Australia they don't give a shit about making the grand finals interesting. Like, in like most, North American and European sports, they always got to go right down to the wire. Australia's like, fuck that. We'll have these games be over by halftime. But Penrith gets the job done. They win it 28-12. Notice the grand final was in a cursed stadium. How many times do I talk about this? If you're on my Patreon page, I talk about this a lot with soccer and college football. They always have the perfect stadium sponsor. And notice a cursed stadium, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong because I'm the master of mispronunciation. But a cursed stadium sums to 46. And in this game, notice how, this isn't updated yet, but notice how Penrith got their 46th win against Parramatta all time. So The grand final was on October 2nd. That's the 1-year anniversary of Let's Go Brandon here in the States. But October 2nd, that's the 275th day of the year, the day leaving 90 days in the year. And notice Penrith, New South Wales is 275. Penrith alone is 90. And then when they became they got their 21st finals win all time to win the premiership. Premiership is 73, the 21st prime. Another clear sign they were going to win. But this right here, Newcastle, they were one of the teams that has a 102 connection. And again, the grand final on 10/2. I don't give a shit that Australia writes it 2/10. It can be written both ways, and both ways matter. So Penrith got the 13-1 in this game like championship. So we said, oh, yeah, Penrith is going to be there, and it's on the 275th day of the year, day leaving 90 days. They're going to be there. Are they going to win? It was validated when they played against Newcastle. When they played Penrith, when they played Parramatta, we knew they were going to win it. Up until that point, we knew they were going to be in the grand final. So, and we got to think about them again next year, man. Are they a dynasty? I don't know. It's their 57th season next year. So as usual, we will continue to look at that. But I think we'll leave it there. Again, 2 more futures nailed undeniably. And yeah, seriously, if y'all ain't seen this video right here, I'll link it in the description. Capitals, Golden Knights. I'm telling you, it's probably the best video I ever made. So I'll link that in the description. I'll talk to everybody soon as usual. Till next time, guys.